Welcome again to part 2 of module 1. So now that we have an initial rough idea of what yoga is and where it comes from, let's zoom in on it a little bit closer. The word yoga comes from the Sanskrit root yuj, which means to yoke or to unite or to join, to harness or to apply. In the pure Vedic sense, this union, to unite, refers to the union between the individual self, the Atman, and the universal soul, the Brahman. And don't worry about it for now. We will talk about these concepts more later on. The unification of our own individual soul with the soul of the whole universe, or in other words, the understanding that we already are one and the same, which, if we achieve it, I suppose, gives us a real sense of freedom and belonging and an awareness of our own divine nature, and probably a feeling of being loved too. We may realize that we have incredible capabilities, um, powers of manifestation and creation. But this true merging of Atman and Brahman, which is the ultimate enlightenment, is of course a huge concept and a very ambitious goal, and we may not even be able to reach it fully, even if we tried, until we have moved on to a higher yoga, again with energies influencing us that are more conducive to higher levels of consciousness. But on the way to find this final goal, there are many other steps, and in all of these steps, um, we can find benefits and also a form of unification that is actually taking place in each one of those steps. For example, even in our most simple practice of yoga on the mat, we unite our mind with our breath and our body, which gives us a feeling of calm and ease and better concentration. When we achieve a certain level of concentration, we unite the sense mind to our higher inner self, giving us a profound feeling of contentment and happiness. And as we get more and more practiced, we join and balance out all of our layers of consciousness. And this is another concept we will soon talk about more. And then we will feel more balanced and steady and joyful and empowered at the same time, empowered in all the circumstances of our life. And bit by bit, we begin to harness our full potential in this world. We can already feel some signs of it quite early on in the practice, as long as it is done in full awareness and regularly. So now let's take a little bit more of a look at the schools of thought that form the yogic philosophy. We know that yoga in its traditional form deals with practical ways on how we can achieve self-realization and return to the perfect state of mind that we are designed to have, that is our true nature. And we can remember it and experience it even during difficult times, like the age of Kali Yuga. And like all holistic sciences, there is an understanding that any deeper universal truth is multifaceted and layered and cannot be forced into just one particular mindset or one way of understanding. And as we will learn more later on through the messages of Samkhya philosophy and Ayurveda, it is a given truth that not all humans are the same. Some aspects of truth can be understood and grasped through logic, but also through our feeling sense or our emotional intelligence and our practical experience and our ability to integrate them all. And even though general experience of life as we go through the school system may have us believe that logic and academic study counts as more than emotional or social intelligence, but in truth, they're just different facets of the human experience, and each of us will have their own strength in different areas. So, taking into account the differences in people's personalities and ways of learning and grasping truth, the teachings of yoga were divided again into four main branches. And Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita describes these really beautifully. There is karma yoga for those of an active constitution. Karma, the word karma, means action in Sanskrit, or the results of an action. Those who need to be active in life and experience things through doing, through being practical. When we use our actions to serve a higher purpose, serve the higher good with constant awareness and without attachment to the outcome of the actions, without expectations of any gains, it can elevate us to a state of higher consciousness. It will help us to transcend the ego mind, which, although it is, of course, to have a healthy ego is an important function of the mind, but it is also what trips us up and what prevents us to see the bigger picture and what is the biggest obstacle to enlightenment. And we will talk more about the ego when we talk about Samkhya philosophy in the next module. And then Bhakti Yoga, for the emotionally inclined, is a path of love and devotion. It can be practiced through things like heartfelt songs and chanting, and by devoting to religious deities for anyone who like to follow a religion. This is often seen in religious ceremonies, even in church, the singing in church, the devotional singing, but also mothers who love their children unconditionally practice Bhakti Yoga quite naturally. And again, it is based on transcending the ego to connect to higher states of consciousness. And then Jnana Yoga, the path of knowledge, is for those who are more intellectually minded, the scientists among us. This involves a lot of studying, especially the Vedas and the Upanishads, the kind of scriptures and books that are conducive to higher consciousness, the Shruti scriptures. And it involves using the discerning mind to understand higher truth through knowledge and to evolve our mind in this way to higher states of consciousness. The ego can also be transcended through knowledge. If there's any scientists among you, or really anyone in pursuit of knowledge, if you are fully devoted to the subject of your study, the ego diminishes and gives way to something bigger. And then finally, Raja Yoga, which is printed in bold because it will be an important path for us. It is also referred to as the royal path, and it is kind of a culmination of the other three paths. It uses some aspects of karma, bhakti, and jnana yoga, and focuses on some form of meditation quite a lot to connect to our true self and experience our own true nature directly. Raja Yoga is actually also called classical yoga often because it follows the teachings from the classical period of Indian philosophy when the Yoga Sutras were written, which was about 1,700 years ago, or even more. The dates really vary a lot according to the different sources. And another name it is often given is Ashtanga Yoga, or the eight-limbed path of yoga. Ashtau means eight, and Anga is a limb or a branch. So it is the eight-limbed path of yoga. The classical text on Raja Yoga or Ashtanga Yoga was written by an Indian sage called Patanjali sometime during the beginning of our Common Era. And again, the exact dates are difficult to find. But in this text, he wrote down 196 very short aphorisms and divided them into 4 chapters. And they are called the Yoga Sutra of Patanjali. They describe the path of yoga according to the older teaching. So he didn't actually invent anything new, but he made it a lot easier for us by compiling the most important aspects of the teachings of yoga into a practical guide. The Yoga Sutra will also be the text we will use mostly in this course, and we will be reading through quite a few of the selected aphorisms. Then During the beginning of the Common Era, in the middle still of Kali Yuga, something else happened too. People of this age were mostly tied into hard work for survival and had families to look after. This was the Dark Age already, Kali Yuga. Leading a purely spiritual life full of sitting around in meditation for hours simply wasn't possible for most. But the longing for spiritual enlightenment and freedom and happiness is, of course, always going to be there. And so people were looking for other ways of finding this freedom. It is always out of a need that new ideas emerge and that they are implemented. And it's not different in the spiritual evolution of humanity either. The teachings of Tantra developed out of this need as a new esoteric lineage. Tantra, the word Tantra means loom or weave, and it refers to a system or a doctrine that spreads or weaves its message so that it can reach into every person's life, no matter who they are. And also that everything is woven together and that we don't have to separate ourselves from life to achieve enlightenment. We can be right in it. The tantric teachings give instructions to living a conscious life, doing everything we have to do with more awareness, and seeing the divine in every aspect of life. It teaches about divine love and the unification of the masculine and feminine principles in everything. Contrary to popular belief, it is not an instruction for great sex. This misunderstanding apparently has come from an American occultist called Pierre Bernard, who was introducing the American people to his interpretation of the tantric texts. Although there is a reference to sexual practice in one of the texts, most of them are instructions for householders on achieving enlightenment through involvement with life, through the body and everyday actions. Many branches of Buddhism are actually based on these tantric scriptures and include chanting practices, Zen and mindfulness practices that can be done even while we are carrying out work. The sexual references are about using sex as a devotional offering in awareness of its sacred nature, the divine act of merging the divine feminine and masculine rather than just as an ego-based gratification and of sensual desires. Tantric ideas include the sacredness of the human body as the temple of the divine masculine and feminine. It describes the merging of Shiva and Shakti energies through the spine as Kundalini energy, the nervous system, the nadis and chakras, and it offers several techniques in order to control that flow of energy, including chanting, visualizations, meditations, nature worship, worship of the divine feminine, rituals, breathing techniques, and also physical exercises. So then around the 14th century, Hatha Yoga developed as a practice out of Tantra philosophies. Hatha is a Sanskrit word consisting of two syllables, ha, referring to sun, and ta, referring to the moon. Hatha Yoga is translated as the forceful yoga, which uses physical postures, pranayama, and also cleansing techniques to manipulate the subtle body, the nadis, the chakras, and our nervous system. The main text for Hatha Yoga is the Hatha Pradipika or the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, which was written sometime in the 15th century and describes the physical practices like asana, postures, breathing techniques or pranayama, energy locks or bandhas, hand gestures or mudras, and cleansing practices called shatkarmas. And we will also take a little bit of a closer look at some of it in the coming weeks. And like most texts that were written during Kali Yuga, the methods are specifically aimed at householders, people who have duties to their family and work commitments and cannot afford to become ascetics or spend many hours in meditation. They provide us with tangible, concrete practices that can be carried out in daily rituals that don't take up too much time. And they begin with the physical body, the most easy to grasp, tangible form of our being. The image of the traditional loincloth and dreadlocked hatha yogi did, of course, not appeal very much to the British when they began their occupation of India in the year 1773. And the British did their best to ban the practice and raise a pretty negative image of yogis. And it worked quite well for a while and was even supported by wealthier Indians who benefited from the British rule. So hatha yogis were shunned and wandering yogis were banned from the cities. And so many of them retreated and hid in caves in the Himalayan mountains. But near the end of the 18th century, for political reasons, the British introduced a new policy in which they encouraged the celebration of Indian traditions again. This in turn encouraged Indian intellectuals to give some traditions, including Hatha Yoga, a makeover to make it more appealing to the masses. More physical postures were added, and they were given a more practical purpose. They were used as a healing method based on a medical system of Ayurveda, reducing the big goal of finding enlightenment to simply achieving a state of physical and mental health, which is what really everyone wants and needs, no matter of their state of consciousness. And maybe it is as much as we can ask for in ages like Kali Yuga and maybe the beginnings of Dwapara Yuga. And as a part of this makeover was the promotion of yoga through yoga performances. So really, it wasn't actually so different than today, where there are also many attempts to make yoga look cool on Instagram, and where its bigger goal is more and more reduced to finding physical and mental well-being. Sometimes nowadays, it's even reduced to simply getting more flexible. But then again, physical and mental well-being and health are a part of the journey toward enlightenment. If we're sick, we can't be happy. And if we're unhappy, we can't be enlightened. And also, it helped, no doubt, for yoga to spread all over the world. In the year 1893, an Indian monk called Swami Vivekananda traveled to the USA and presented yoga demonstrations to the public, probably for the first time. He was holding a speech at the Parliament of World Religions, and it may have been the first time that big Western audiences have seen or heard about Hatha Yoga. So that was the first time yoga made its way to the West, just at the start of Dwapara Yuga, just before the turn of the century. And then from then on, an interest was sparked and things just happened. In the early part of the 1900s, two other teachers in particular did a lot to raise the profile of Hatha Yoga in India and became probably the two most influential yoga teachers of their time. One of them was Swami Shivananda, who in his life wrote almost 300 books on yoga and related subjects, and he was the founder of the Divine Life Society. His teachings form the basis of the Bihar School of Yoga, who do a lot of teaching and research work and publish many books on all sorts of aspects of yoga. His lineage is quite well known today among yoga practitioners everywhere in Europe and probably elsewhere too. And it still is taught in quite a traditional sense. And the other man was Sri Tirumalai Krishnamacharya. Krishnamacharya was born in 1888. He was a Brahmin, a member of the higher caste. So he was well respected. He had studied all 6 darshanas and was well respected in society. He learned yoga from his father and some other teachers too, until in 1919 he sought out a yogi called Rama Mohana Brahmachari, who was living in a cave at the time in the Himalayan mountains. And He spent 7 years with him there in the cave, intensively studying yoga asanas, pranayama, and the Yoga Sutras, as well as some other texts in yoga, like the Yoga Kurunta, which is a book on yoga that hasn't actually been found yet, but it is set to describe the basics of the vinyasa way of posture practicing, the way we will learn to practice here in this course. So he lived there with his teacher, his guru, for 7 years, learning everything he could. And this was the way it was done in those days. There wasn't a class that you went to once or twice a week or a 4-week retreat somewhere. It was 7 years of living in and apprenticing with your teacher. So what price can you put on that? It's priceless, really. And so because of that, the guru was hugely respected, much more respected than any Western teacher would be respected today. It was a different culture, a different mindset, a different system altogether. And so it was custom that at the end of the apprenticeship, at the end of the 7 years, when he was finished his studies, his teacher had the right to ask him anything he wanted in return. And Krishnamacharya was obliged to give it to him no matter what. And what Rama Mohana Brahmachari asked of him was that he was to raise a family, be a householder, and become a yoga teacher, to spread yoga to all the householders in the world. For Krishnamacharya, it was a big step down as a Brahmin to become a Hatha yoga teacher, but he had to fulfill his promise. So Krishnamacharya eventually married and moved to Mysore in India. And because he was a Brahmin and well respected, he taught yoga to the royal family, the Maharaja's family. And the Maharaja was so impressed with Krishnamacharya's skills, he actually felt he had healed him of several conditions through the application of yoga practice. He became his patron and provided him with everything he needed, including premises for a yoga shala or yoga center in Mysore. And so he had many students there, and some of them went on to become teachers. And especially 4 of those in particular were later to become the most influential teachers of yoga in the Western world. There was Indra Devi, Desikachar, who was Krishnamacharya's son, BKS Iyengar, and Patabi Joyce. Indra Devi was a European actress and a dancer. Her real name was Eugenie Peterson. She was originally from Russia, but she lived in Berlin. She traveled to India a lot for acting and dance reasons. Her family was wealthy and they were acquainted with the Maharaja of Mysore. And it was only because of the pressure from the Maharaja on Krishnamacharya that Krishnamacharya reluctantly accepted her as a student, because up until then, women were not taught the practice of yoga. So later on, she traveled the world and eventually moved to Hollywood and taught yoga to many famous people like Greta Garbo and I think Marilyn Monroe. And she wrote books and made yoga into a bit of a fashion in the days. And then there was Krishnamacharya's own son, Desikachar, who of course had studied with him for all his life. As he was watching his father teaching yoga in so many different ways to so many different people, all according to their individual needs and constitutions, and he saw the results, the therapeutic effects of yoga. So he continued the lineage in this way. And then there was BKS Iyengar, who was Krishnamacharya's brother-in-law. Many of you probably know the name as Iyengar Yoga. When Iyengar was very young, he had many health problems. He struggled with illness all his life, and he was generally of a weak constitution. And when he was 15, Krishnamacharya invited him to Mysore to learn yoga to improve on his health. And his health did begin to improve, but Iyengar always struggled a lot with achieving any difficult postures. And also he seemed to have a difficult relationship with his very strict teacher. Later on, he also injured his spine in an accident, which of course made his asana practice even harder. So he didn't have it easy, to say the least. But his determination to achieve success in asana led him to spend a lot of time analyzing each posture and finding new ways and support systems on how to master them. So he used props like bricks and straps and chairs and blocks, and he was eventually encouraged by Krishnamacharya to teach in these methods to the public. And it's because of him that now we have all these helpful props like blocks and straps. And if you ever go to a proper Iyengar class, you will use many of these props and go very deeply with the help of the props into each single asana. Not to offend anyone, as I have a really great admiration for the Iyengar method and use it a lot myself. But there's a joke I find very funny. How many Iyengar teachers does it take to change a light bulb? Just one. But he will need 2 mats, a chair, 4 blocks, a strap, and a brick. Anyway, this method became very popular and well respected in the yoga community as the Iyengar yoga method. And then finally, there was Pattabhi Jois. Pattabhi Jois was attracted to yoga practice from a very early age, when as a child he watched one of Krishnamacharya's yoga demonstrations. He probably had a calling for it early on. At the age of 12, he started to practice daily in secret because his family were not very supportive of yoga practice. Eventually, he ran away from home to Mysore to join the yoga community there. He studied yoga and Sanskrit with Krishnamacharya for a long time and then became one of his assistant teachers. In 1948, he opened up the Ashtanga Yoga Research Institute in Mysore. Later, at some stage, he was visited by a traveler from Belgium who wanted to learn about yoga and who wrote a book about yoga. And in the back of the book, which was published, in the back of the book was the address of the Ashtanga Yoga Research Center and a picture of Pattabhi Jois. So after the book was published and became quite well known, more and more Westerners started to travel to India, to Mysore, to learn yoga from Pattabhi Jois. And they then brought it back to Europe and America and started to teach it there. So his method of teaching, according to Pattabhi Jois, was almost identical to the way he was taught by his teacher, Krishnamacharya, with only a few adaptations. But probably because he had an increasing number of students to teach, especially athletic Westerners who came flocking to him by that stage and who were eager to learn, he packaged the postures into set sequences that were learned and passed on by his Western student as they were. This system of sequences and the methods of Ashtanga Yoga spread out and became known worldwide as Ashtanga Vinyasa Yoga, or just in short referred to as Ashtanga Yoga. It is a little bit confusing, as the true meaning of Ashtanga Yoga refers to the 8 limbs of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras and not to any set physical sequence. And we have to always remember that as we are practicing and not be swept away by the pure physical achievement of the postures. Pattabhi Jois's postures can be very challenging, and the way they are packaged cater to the physically fit and determined competitive mind, and also to there's a lot of hip openers and lotus very early on, where people in the West who sit on chairs a lot and have very often weak knees and tight hips, it can be a little bit dangerous to follow those sequences without thinking more about it. We have to remember that true Ashtanga Yoga is for everyone, and it has nothing to do with achieving difficult postures or sticking religiously to any set sequence. But having said that, the first of his sequences, which is meant to be used as a general physical and mental therapy, is based on a lot of knowledge of the subtle bodies and of Ayurveda. And for this reason, it is a great source. It's a great sequence to use as a template, as long as we can resist the temptation to go beyond our capabilities and just let go of the wanting to achieve, which can be a little bit of a danger in this particular system of yoga. In my opinion, using the sequence as a template works for most people if some changes are applied that cater for each individual and takes into account the needs of our body at this moment in time, with all its challenges of modern day, like tight hips, weak backs and shoulders, shorter attention span, and so on. Whatever our practice is, we need to establish first where we are at and what we need, and then take small steps from there using our own intelligence and intuition rather than just following a method blindly. Now let's talk about Vinyasa Yoga. Vinyasa means literally to place something in a special way. It refers to the ritualized way the practice is carried out. Each asana is connected by a certain sequence of movement guided by the breath, so that everything really can be united and practiced in union, in harmony, and with grace. Grace is nothing but the alignment of us with the cosmic forces around us, or the alignment of our body to our environment, or to music, or to our breath. During a vinyasa practice, we literally flow from one asana into the next, connected by the breath, connecting the whole practice through the breath into a moving meditation. It is the style that I believe is most suited to the practice of Patanjali's instruction of yoga, as it allows for a meditative state of mind without having to think about what posture to do next. But of course, we will learn more about this as we practice it over the coming weeks. So I do hope that this introduction helped you to have a better understanding of what yoga is and where it came from, and why it is practiced the way it is now. So please don't hesitate to post questions if you have any, and I will answer them as best as I can. I do recommend that you complete all of the 4 reflection practices, as I'm certain that if you do, you will have a much more holistic and integrated experience of this course. And of course, I do encourage you to read as much as possible from the list of suggested books. I hope you enjoyed this first module, and I will see you again in the next one. Bye for now.